Welcome to Joe and Mike's Virtual Tours of Scotland on a live tour today of Edinburgh's New Town, second part. We covered the first part last Monday, and thank you very much for watching. And you can see today the weather, we've got blue sky, we've got sun, we've got a bit of wind, so having to be careful with the kilt here. Now I'm going to start the tour by talking about this statue, which is of George IV. Now, famously visited Edinburgh in 1822. A monarch had never visited Scotland for about 170 years, so we were kind of disengaging from the monarchy. So Sir Walter Scott orchestrated 2 weeks of huge celebrations, carnival type celebrations, when people came out decked in tartan. And he brought tartan, Walter Scott, to the fore because he encouraged the king to wear a kilt. This is King George IV here, which he'd never done in his life before. And this is Lowlands, Edinburgh, so it wasn't customary for Highland dress to be worn here unless you were from the Highlands. But the lowland people of Edinburgh decided to distinguish themselves from their lowland English neighbours by decking themselves up in the tartan and the kilt. And this king here famously visited Edinburgh. He wasn't the most popular of kings because we were going through quite a lot of economic gloom and poverty, so it was quite hard to sell this image of the king, but Walter Scott was doing his best to do it. One of the events that happened while the king was here was called the Peers Ball in 1822, and it happened just along the road here, and I'll show you the building, but I want to show you a picture, a sketch done by Sir David Wilkie, who was one of the most famous artists around at the time, and you can maybe get a look at how the tartan was being worn very fashionably. This guy here has got like a tartan coat, and he has got matching trousers or pants there, but you can see them in all the finery, and that was quite new, happening in 1822. Now the sculptor who sculpted this here was well known for doing sculptures of the monarchs, especially George IV, and he was called Sir Francis Chantrey. He was from England, and his method was to use a kind of camera obscura to capture a likeness of the king, to have some sketches, usually a forward-looking image and a side profile, and would go on from there using various assistants. And he is well known also for a statue of George Washington in the state, and I'm trying to remember which state it is. I think it was the State House at Massachusetts, and there is a statue of Washington by the same sculptor, and there's also a statue of George IV by the sculptor again in Trafalgar Square in London. So, famous visit. Now this with the beautiful Ionic columns was the shop of William Blackwood. I know we've got a descendant of William Blackwood who may be watching today at some point, Patty, and he had his bookshop here. His original bookshop was on Southbridge, and he didn't regret coming and resituating here in George Street in the later 19th century, and he said George Street is increasingly becoming the centre of business, not like Princes Street, which is full of carriages and is a bit like Charing Cross, but this was a place to do well in your business, Blackwood. Now he had a magazine called Blackwood's Magazine, which was nicknamed Maga, and it was full of literary essays, criticisms, and brought in, at a later point, people like Thomas de Quincey, who I spoke about earlier on, and James Hogg, who wrote Confessions of a Justified Sinner. And this shop was here till about the 1980s, maybe surprised to know, run by descendants of the family, but then it's no more. You notice the, hello Patty, nice that you're here. You can see your ancestors' shop, what used to be. Now, he didn't actually live here. He lived in what was called the Murray Estates, which is to the west of the city. He had a wonderful, beautiful apartment there. But this is where his main business operated from, and he was also a publisher, of course, and you may have heard an earlier tour when I was talking about John Wilson or Christopher North, who was a contributor to Blackwood's magazine, and it was a competitor to the Edinburgh Review. The Edinburgh Review tended to be more a sort of liberal publication, but this one was more of a Tory slant, but nonetheless a very informative educational magazine. William Blackwood collected rare, antiquarian, curious publications in his early business as a bookseller. And this frontage, which was redesigned for him coming here by one Thomas Hamilton, who's a very notable architect. So you can see the amazing Ionic columns here too. Now, it wasn't just him that had his business here. On the other side, with this big portico, if Joe can swing around a bit, you can see this was put on at a later stage with the Corinthian capitals, which are not common for Georgian architecture. This was a later thing. But on the right-hand side was a silk mercer, a producer, a seller of silk, and they were also called Blackwood. So there may have been, I think there must have been a connection there somewhere. Okay, so William Blackwood, this was his place of business here. Assembly rooms, designed by John Henderson. And if you had a new town, you needed a place of entertainment for the wealthy residents, and that's what it was. A big meeting place, a big place to hold exotic balls. And it opened in 1787 with what was called the Caledonian Hunt Ball, where all the fine people of Edinburgh's New Town gathered for a major event. Now inside it's got 17 chandeliers, and would you believe 500,000 crystal pieces in these chandeliers, which must be a bit of a nightmare to clean when it has to be done. It's still a venue during the Edinburgh Festival, Arts Festival in August, and it has seen famous people, famous writers such as J.K. Rowling reading chapters from Harry Potter, but going back from then to Charles Dickens, to Sir Walter Scott, and many other famous literary people have spoken here in the assembly rooms. Now, the original entry to the assembly rooms wasn't at the front, it was down here, down the side here. The frontage had not been added, it's a later frontage, but if you can look through where the lamps are, not the first set of lamps on the left hand side, but the second set of lamps, you may see boot scrapers. Well, that is where they were piling in 1822 to get a glimpse of King George IV in his kilt. And it was a time when most of the wealthy male citizens of Edinburgh were also dressing up in Highland dress and loving it. And we've got our kilts on today. So, the assembly rooms, beautiful. Understated building of Edinburgh's New Town. The statue, you can see here. This is William Pitt the Younger. Now, William Pitt the Younger was in place in the late 18th, early 19th centuries, at a time when the country was going through a lot of financial problems. Napoleonic Wars, of course, with France, and the American War of Independence, which were big losses for the British. He was the youngest Prime Minister at the age of 24. And he served for 13 years. 3 times he was Prime Minister, 3 terms, as you might know it in the States. And he was all for cleaning up the Act of Parliament to put in parliamentary reform, to do anti-corruption measures. He was friendly with George III, which was a great help to him when he was not popular in Parliament. He was also adding new measures of taxation to save the country from huge economic distress. And one of the forms of taxation which he is connected with but didn't invent was window tax. Window tax was around in the 17th century. and the government charged you depending on how many windows you had, and if you had 7 or more windows you would have to pay so much per window. So it was hopefully a fair method of taxation geared for the most wealthy people to pay more and the poorer people to pay less. But the connection that William Pitt has got with that is that around that time window tax was put up. The rate of window tax was increased because we were in such dire financial difficulties. One of the youngest Prime Ministers was Tony Blair, at the age of 43 was Prime Minister, and Boris Johnson, our present British Prime Minister, is 56, so 24 years of age to be Prime Minister, that was quite an achievement. William Pitt the younger. And we're coming up to the Northern Lighthouse Board headquarters here on George Street. And you can tell by the little lighthouse at the top there. Now, Northern Lighthouse Board, it came into being about the 1780s, 90s, late 18th century. And if you look at the flag, you can note a very strange Union flag. There is something missing there, and what it is this Patrick's Cross, because this Northern Lighthouse Board was founded before Ireland came into the Union, and it's one of the few places that you can see that form of Union flag. Now, behind this elegant frontage, you may be surprised to know there are workshops, there are places for repairing lighthouses, equipment for repairing lighthouses and garages, because that's what they do. They maintain all the lighthouse around Scotland. We've got about 220 lighthouses currently today, but in the 18th century, in the 1780s, lighthouses were not popular, would you believe, because people liked shipwrecks, especially if you had agricultural land looking onto the coast. I will say no more. So lighthouses weren't always the most popular thing, but today we're a bit more sensible and we're not wanting shipwrecks. And lighthouses also were painted black during the Second World War so that they weren't seen too obviously from planes coming over Scotland. And you can see the mini lighthouse at the top there, just above the doorway. Inside here also is a table and a sculpture of Robert Stevenson, the grandfather of Robert Louis Stevenson, who designed the Bell Rock lighthouse, a very famous lighthouse, in 1811. So it's a most elegant interior. Okay, I want to show you this here is Hamilton in inches. This came into being in the 1860s, and has got the royal warrant, had the royal warrant from Queen Victoria as her silversmiths, as well as clock specialists. And today it is still that for the present Queen Elizabeth II, who will from time to time come and visit here. Now, their original branch, and it was started up, this company, by Robert Kirk Inches and his uncle, who was James Hamilton, who had a shop on Princess Street, and they decided, just as like Blackwood said, you know, the centre of business is going to be George Street, and they moved into here in 1952. Now, it survived for a long time, and in fact, our badge, I can show you this little badge here, and Joe's got the same. These blue badges are produced by Hamilton and Inches, because we're professional guides, and we don't want people pretending they're blue badge guides, so they have got the contract, this top-end jeweller, for making our badges. Accredited also and allowed by the Lord Lion, King of Arms. Right. So, interesting history, because in 1990 this shop business was taken over by Aspreys, who are a much larger jeweller. But then, after that, there was a management buyout, and it reverted to being still the business of Hamilton and Inches, the longest surviving silversmith and clock specialist in Scotland. So, amazing. And I'm not going to look too closely in the window because I'm just going to get too tempted. And of course, quite expensive jewellery and watches there today. But this used to be Andrew Melrose, who was one of the earliest tea merchants in Scotland, 1812, had a shop in the Canongate, and then once again, as his business improved, he moved into George Street. If you look at the wonderful architecture and the cast iron pillars there, most elegant, and the cast iron balcony at the top, once again designed by Thomas Hamilton, who designed William Blackwood's shop further along here. This was a grocer's. Andrew Melrose was a tea merchant, but it was also ran a grocer's shop, and that's what the activity was in here. Now today, descendants of Melrose are still in existence, and they're called Edinburgh Tea and Coffee Company, and they operate out of Portobello, and they're of that dynasty of the Melrose family. Tea, of course, was a very expensive item, but these people, wealthy residents of New Town, Edinburgh, could certainly afford it. So we're going to walk further along and get a glimpse just over the street of Freemasons Hall. It's an actual 20th century, early 20th century, and it's quite heavy architecture. It's the Masonic Lodge of Scotland who occupy that palace, if you like, and the interior I much prefer to the exterior. I think the exterior is a little bland, but if you look above the door, you can see the figure of St Andrew, who is the patron saint of Scotland. But if you look further up, you see all these urns and heavy decoration, which is untypical of understated Georgian architecture, so it doesn't really quite blend in as well as it should do. At number 39, North Castle Street was the home of Sir Walter Scott, a historical novelist I spoke about in an earlier tour with the Scott Monument. Well, he loved this house here, and back in the backyard, in the garden at the back, there is a little gravestone to one of his dogs. He was a great dog lover, and there's a little gravestone with spice on the tablet, and it was a little terrier who was a constant companion to Sir Walter Scott. I'm not going to say too much other than he had to sell this house because he became bankrupt at one point, and he had to survive by his pen, which meant he had to keep writing and able to survive. But he had to give up this house, and that was a great shame. And a most elegant house it is also.